My name is Ronnie Lovler, and I'm having the privilege to introduce J.C. Derrick. And I can't tell you what J.C. stands for because then he'll have to kill me. And so I'm not going to say anything. But he's the publisher of Mainstreet Daily News that I have the privilege to work for. I've been writing now for about 4 years or so. I write a regular column on aging, and I do a lot of different things for them. And it's really fun, and it's really a privilege, and I'm really happy that I stumbled upon this and that it's been a continuing relationship. But JC is our publisher, and I think you'll all agree that Mainstreet's become a real force and a real presence in our community. I mean, and I hear that from people all the time. And I think the general consensus is that we want even more from Mainstreet. So we'll see what we can do. There's a sister publication now in Apopka, the Apopka Chief, that JC is heading up as well. And if you've read, JC's been in journalism for a long time. He has a career he started out in Texas and Washington, D.C., and then he met up with the people who hired him on to start Mainstreet for us. And Mainstreet is part of a bigger package that also includes a lot of Mark Media, a lot of radio stations here in town. I'm not going to list them all because then I'll cut in too much to JC's talking time, and we want to hear what he has to say. So JC's going to talk to us about something that's really, it's a difficult time now, is local news. I think we all agree here, local news is extremely important, and we all need to know what's going on in our community. But it's harder and harder to keep local news going. We hear about the layoffs, we hear about news deserts, but I'm not going to talk to you about it. JC is. So without further ado.
Thank you, Ronnie, for that kind introduction, and thank you all for having me. I've got, I think there's a joke in here somewhere about a newspaper guy forgetting to print out his notes, but I did. So I'm going to work off my laptop here. Thank you all again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I always love to get out in the community and talk about what we're doing at Mainstreet, and today, particularly also to talk about kind of the local news landscape and what we're seeing in other places as well. First of all, I want to also just applaud what you're doing for two reasons. Alexis de Tocqueville famously recognized the importance of associations and people coming together as one of the things that makes America truly special. And I think that's just as true, 200 years later after he said it as it was when he said it. And the other thing is just I want to applaud you for standing up for free speech. It's a very, very important topic. So just really appreciate what you all do and your commitment to it and your I don't know you all, but I'm sure your advocacy and everything that you do in your personal lives to try to help make the world a better place. As you know, there are a ton of threats to free speech, and so it's incumbent upon all of us to stand up for it. And obviously, that's near and dear to my heart. Being in journalism, we care about the freedom of speech and the press, which are obviously closely related. So today, like I said, I'm here to talk about the landscape, and I'll kind of have a big picture view of what's going on, and then kind of zoom in a little bit more on the Gainesville area, and then specifically what Mainstreet is doing. I'm going to try to keep my remarks to about 20 minutes so that we can leave 5 or 10 minutes for questions and answers. Would love to have some Q&A time with you all to talk about what you want to talk about. So in terms of the local news landscape broadly, it is a fairly bleak picture. I don't think that's, I think sometimes that we get a bit of a bad rap in terms of people sometimes make it seem like it's worse than it is, I think, honestly. But the numbers are what they are. If you're familiar with the Medill School of Journalism up at Northwestern, they put out a report every year on the state of local news, and it's really got some good information in there that really gives us a good idea of the scope of what's happening right now. But just a couple of key numbers would be, one, almost 40% of local newspapers in the United States have disappeared and are no longer in existence. Some 50 million Americans have little to no local news coverage. And I think even the way we think about that, I think even we need to well, I'll just, Report for America is a program that is designed to put reporters back in newsrooms around the country. And the founder of that, I was at a conference one time and he pointed out that we really need to acknowledge news deserts as they are and not just what we think of them as. When you look at the Medill map, for example, you'll see counties around the country that are labeled as news deserts. But there are many other counties where he said, if you have only one story a day in your town about what's happening, you're a functional news desert. So as you know, there are many papers around the country that have been bought up by these chains that are running a bunch of wire copy, and it's not actual local news. You might have a local newspaper, but it's not local news, and that's playing out all around the country. So, like I said, I think the numbers are sobering in terms of actual news deserts, but it really goes beyond that into some of the effects we've seen of just being really hard in a lot of places to get access to local news and information. So other things we've seen, obviously public broadcasting being defunded, state legislatures, and even here in Alachua County, officials have sought to remove legal notices from newspapers, which has all sorts of effects, both for newspapers and for the public. We've seen the rise of big chains, as I said, that have a business model in mind and not the best interest of the communities. Gannett and Alden being two of those. I do think it's important to note, though, that there is this silver lining we're seeing, which is there's a lot of startups happening, and Main Street is definitely not the only one happening in communities around the country. There's a lot of startups. With that said, there's a caveat there as well. I think a lot of them are centered in heavily populated cities, urban areas and things, not in the smaller cities and towns around the country. So that's one downside. And also, they're also a lot of times heavily subsidized by philanthropy. So I'm passionate in our industry of really helping us to find successful business models because regardless of your tax status, whether you're for-profit, public benefit, nonprofit, whatever, you really have three major pillars of an organization. And part of it is advertising. It's still very important. Part of it is reader revenue, which is very important, and then philanthropy as well. But if you don't have a mix of those three, you're going to be at risk. And so I think some of the ones that are straight ahead nonprofits tend to focus on the work at the expense of the business model, and I don't think that's a good thing for us. Long term, we've got to have self-sustaining entities that are serving their communities with successful business models. So just to run through some of the impacts that we've seen with news deserts, we've seen a reduction in civic engagement in communities. And I think there's a new study, I don't know if any of you saw my column a couple months ago, or was it last month, I think, on a new study out of the University of Chicago, Yale, and Texas A&M, where they put out a study that really was looking at what has happened in Florida since the legislature about 4 years ago made it optional if a county chooses to put legal notices on the county website as opposed to in newspapers. And there is now documented evidence that reduces civic engagement. So that's just one example, but we see lower voting in areas that don't have a strong local news presence. We see an increase in government corruption. We see deeper political polarization among residents. The spread of misinformation, particularly on social media. There's also a decrease in local government accountability, an increasingly sense of like fragmented community. I think that comes in news deserts that you also see, and then even one that I think doesn't get much. I don't hear much about this, but is actually also backed up by research from Notre Dame a few years ago. They came out with a study that found communities with a strong local newspaper actually have lower municipal borrowing costs than communities that don't. And that's just because of the general accountability and civic engagement that comes from strong local news. So there's a ton of impacts for our society with news deserts. In terms of here in the Gainesville area, you all are probably familiar with the history. I'll just kind of run through it and then get to Main Street. But as you know, the Gainesville Sun has a proud history here in this town. And this year's actually, I haven't heard anybody talking about this, but it's 150 years old. July of 1876 is when it was founded. Two Pulitzers, obviously a very, very proud history. but has really been gutted by cuts from Gannett. We have TV20 that obviously does local news, the Independent Florida Alligator, the Iguana, I saw it over there, but since COVID, we've seen really some, this kind of merges into my last, I want to tell the Mainstreet story, but basically when Mainstreet came into being, we wanted to help fill the gaps in local news. So where there were gaps, we wanted to focus on things that weren't being done, not just to do everything else that others were doing. But we launched the week before the world shut down from COVID. So not a great time to launch anything, but that's what ended up happening. And obviously you can throw the launch playbook out the window. Things were just completely different because of that. But one of the unfortunate effects, I think partly related to that, was just the continued erosion of local news that we've seen here in the last few years. So the Gainesville Record closed, the Gilchrist County Journal closed, CBS 4 shut down their local news shop, so they don't have any local reporters anymore, and obviously multiple rounds of additional cuts at the Sun. So we've continued to grow to kind of fill that space into a much larger footprint than I think we ever imagined. Originally, the idea was just to go into be an online only publication. And as we grew and the needs grew, we just continued to evolve. So we went into print in 2022. So next month will actually be 4 years that we've been in print. It's hard to believe it's been that long already. But if you're familiar with our content, we have a daily email newsletter that goes out, and that's kind of our. People ask, why are you called Mainstreet Daily News or the weekly newspaper? Part of the reason is because we're not defined by our print edition. We do put out daily news every day on our website. Monday through Friday, we're putting out an email newsletter, and then once a week, we have a print edition that is kind of like our best of from the previous week. And so we found that mix really serves our audience well. We just recently started a weekly podcast. If you're into podcasting, you can find it on whatever podcasting platform you use. It's called Street Smart, get it? Street Smart, Main Street. So our reporters do a great job, but I mean, they are the people who live and work in this community. They are on the streets, and they're bringing you that information directly to you. And it's available on demand. If you're not familiar with podcasts, you can go to Apple Podcasts or whatever. Pretty much any smartphone is going to come with a podcast app. And if you look for Street Smart, you might type in Street Smart Gainesville to make sure that it comes up. But you'll see that there. So a little bit of other things that we've done. We started a membership program in 2023, which I know there's at least a couple members in here. Show of hands, who's a member? All right, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's great. Thank you so much for being members. So it's a little bit different. Mainstreet is free, so everything we have we give away, and a lot of that. I mean, the point is because we believe everybody deserves access to good, reliable local news and information. So we want to put that out there to everybody. But a successful business model does have reader revenue, so we really needed an opportunity, give people an opportunity to support the work, and that really is the main. Ask is, we give some perks to our members as a thank you for supporting the work, but it really is about helping us build a stronger community. That's what Mainstreet is about, and so that's why we ask people to help us. We have over 900 members, which is just phenomenal for a voluntary membership program. We're so grateful for the number of people, and I think it really it's a credit to Gainesville, the number of people who really value local news in this community and want to see it continue. So we're very, very pleased with that. And that's been going for, like I said, about almost 2.5 years now. In 2024, I mentioned Report for America and saw some nods. I think some of you may be familiar with that program. But Report for America is a national program that competitively selects newsrooms for local reporters to cover particular beats. So as a newsroom, you apply and you say, okay, we'd like a reporter to do, in our case, it was education. We thought we had a part-time education person, but we thought it was silly that a town, Gainesville, Florida, University of Florida, all these K through 12 schools, just a bit of news coming out of the school district, and there's a little bit to cover there. And so we applied for a full-time education reporter and got it because Alachua County, of all places, certainly needs one. And so we have a UF grad, Nick Anschultz, who's been doing a phenomenal job. He's about 10 months in, has written over 100 unique byline stories already. on education. So really filling a vital need in the community. And the way RFA works, by the way, is they provide you with a portion of the funding, and then the other portion of the funding, they help you either, they are your fiscal sponsor and help facilitate philanthropic gifts, or they help you work with whoever your partner is in the community. So in our case, we've partnered with the Community Foundation of North Central Florida, and Barzella Papa has been great to work with us to help continue to build our newsroom. So last year we added an education reporter. Are we off the record here? Can you keep a secret? So we have not announced this publicly yet, but we do. We also have been RFA has selected us again this year for a full-time photographer, and so we're very excited about that. I was talking to both Jackie Levine and Diane McFarland, who some of you probably know. And they said back in the day they had like 8 photographers, at the Sun. She was like, we shot everything that moved in this town, and now it's like we just want one, that's all we want, just one. And because going back to that trust issue, it really is important the way people view your news. A lot of times the first thing they're seeing is on social media, and there's obviously tons of issues. We could talk about AI and all sorts of the issues that are concerning in terms of people's ability to trust what they see, but having locally sourced high quality photography, we feel like is really important to send the signal that this is trustworthy local news taken in your community. So we're very excited about that. Just in terms of quickly, I want to cover a little bit of our impact. We've grown to over 150,000 unique users on our website every month. So very pleased that so many people are accessing our content. We have a weekly print circulation of 20,000, which is, well, I'll just tell you, it's 10 times the Gainesville Sun's number. So, yeah. And I say that not to brag or anything, but like just in terms of reaching people and making an impact in the community, like we're doing that, and that's really encouraging to see. Also, our daily email newsletter has over or almost 11,000 daily newsletter subscribers with an open rate that is close to 40%, which is very high across the industry. Also want to talk about just a few things, and I'll wrap it up and open up for Q&A, is just some of the stories we've done. As we've grown, we have turned into more of a newspaper of record, so we are covering everything, both the obligatory stories and the selective stories. We do features. We've got award-winning Ronnie's series. She was modest in the way she mentioned it, but it is an award-winning series. She's won multiple awards for her Aging Matters series. That's outstanding. We've won awards for our local sports coverage, government, faith and family, all sorts of different things. So we're very pleased with that. But a few of the high impact stories that I look for are the ones that really these stories wouldn't have been told if Mainstreet wasn't there. And so just a few I jotted down as I was preparing for this talk. And one of those would be in 2024, you may have seen the series of stories that we did on the North Florida Hospital instrument issues. Major issue affecting public health. And so we, I won't go into all the details, but like we have very hard specific evidence of the way that our reporting changed outcomes there, not only for people who were making healthcare decisions, but also for how rapidly HCA prioritized actually getting those issues fixed. And by all accounts, they are fixed. And there may not be a safer place to have instruments than North Florida Hospital now because of all the work that they've done over there. In December, we did a big story on the series of ADA lawsuits that are happening here in Gainesville. You may have seen those stories. And again, this is one of those places where we not only did our reporters find that and uncover it and report on it, but we saw an actual difference because since, as far as I know, there may be something very recently I'm not aware of, but as far as I know, since we blew the lid on that story in December, there have been no new lawsuits happening, which makes a real difference to the local businesses. Because as you know, if you read those stories, they weren't going after chains. They're going after the places where the owner is behind the counter trying to eke out a living here locally and serve our community. There was also a major story we did last year. Lillian Hammond is our rural reporter, and she did an outstanding story on some accusations in Alachua and it was involving voting and ostensibly voter fraud. But I think her story really highlighted the thin line between voter fraud and voter suppression, and really highlighted some of what was going on there, where people were on the books and had every reason to believe they were voting legally, and then only find out in hindsight they weren't. And so I felt like that was really important reporting. That again, these wouldn't have happened otherwise. There was also another story. This is the last one I'll touch on. In Alachua, there was a state investigation into some things that were going on at Bukhari Law and Alachua Today. And we were actually sued to prevent our publication of a story about what they were investigating. And the judge threw it out within 3 days. So I think it's a sign of your effectiveness when you're getting sued to stop publication. It's like you're starting to provide some accountability where it really matters. So and if you didn't read that story, that FDLE. Again, this is not me. This is FDLE says that the reason they were there was to investigate what they say were dozens of sexual abuse of young boys that took place at that building. So again, when you're writing stories like these that wouldn't have been told otherwise, I feel like it's fair to say that we're talking about lives saved, local businesses protected, voting rights defended, and potentially vulnerable children who are warned of what could potentially be out there. So we believe this is what local news is all about, and so that's what we're trying to deliver here to Gainesville. So that's all for me. Thank you for your time.
Our speaker would be very happy to entertain questions.
I think he was first.
I canceled my subscription with Gainesville Sun a couple of years ago because they no longer had letters to the editor. The diversity of opinions that I live with is oftentimes talking to echo chambers, and we all, that's how we are as humans. And I'm really interested in hearing the diversity of opinions from my fellow citizens in this county and even some of the surrounding counties. So is there any chance we're going to have one in your newspaper?
That is a great question. So quick background, when we came into being, the Gainesville Sun was doing a lot of opinion. Nathan Crabb was there, and there was a robust opinion section. So like I said, we were trying to focus on filling gaps. But for that reason, we were founded without really kind of an infrastructure to do it. Just briefly, I'll say, I think there are three levels of an opinion page. The first would be editorials, institutional sort of endorsements, things like that. We're not interested in ever doing that part of it. The second level would be, and again, the reason is just because I feel like that was useful at a time when the newspaper was the center of the discussion around the community. I feel like now people just want to know what's going on. They have 50 million people telling them what to think. Like we're not going to try to tell you what to think. We're just trying to report the news. I also think in today's highly polarized landscape, it's too easy to associate the op-eds with all the rest of your coverage, which we don't want to be tainted. So that's one piece. The next level on that would be curated kind of op-eds, where you're allowing people to write in 500-600 words, and that one is I wouldn't rule it out. It's possible, but it really would take another editor probably. I mean, as you know, they had an opinion editor who curated all of that. I mean, you've got to come up with policies and decide, how far in the fringes are you going to allow people to go? And there's just a lot there to work through. And so it hasn't been something that we felt like we needed to prioritize at this point. I think the lowest hanging fruit that I would do in next week's paper is letters to the editor. We already get a lot of feedback on the website. I mean, it would be very easy to put that into print. The problem is, if you read our print edition, you know that, and our email newsletter, you know that the email newsletter has like twice as much content as the print edition. And that's because what's true, has always been true for newspapers is true for us, and that is you build the newspaper around advertising. How much advertising you have determines how long your newspaper is going to be. So we have more content than we can jam in it already. And so what we would really need is a partner in the community, a sponsor to come forward, and someone who would want to, and it doesn't have to be letters to the editor, you could call it the community forum or something, but we need somebody, a bank, some large institution who would be willing to, sponsor having a diversity of opinions in the newspaper. And it wouldn't have to be every week either. You could do once a month. I think there's lots of ways to do that, but we haven't been able to find anybody to support that just yet. Maybe soon.
Yes. So you mentioned that there's currently a suppression of news. And I wondered if you also see a parallel to the suppression of protest music. During Vietnam, you had a lot of protest songs. Back in the Depression, this is your land, this is my land. And except for, I can remember Bruce Springsteen going to Minneapolis and doing a remake of Streets of Minneapolis, I don't see a lot of songs protesting what's going on in society, or at least I'm not wary of it. But do you see some parallel there? Why aren't there the music songs, or am I just out of the loop?
No, that's a great question. I mean, that's a great insight. I've not heard anybody really point that out, but I think you're right. This is completely off the top of my head. I could be wrong. I don't have data to back this up, but I would guess that it could be because of the professionalization of the music industry, where rather than sort of writing music for art's sake and to express themselves, it's more about, that's not going to make you the most money. You don't want to turn off half your fans. You need to be doing this kind of work, which will make you the most money. That would be my guess as to why they might be. Maybe some of those songs are being written and just, the managers aren't allowing them to see the light of day. I don't know.
Over here.
Yes, sir.
Hi.
You're good.
Oh, good. I am one of the very few who still gets the Gainesville Sun delivered via my postmaster, who brings it to me sometimes every night, not always, but we get it for the sports, I will have to say. That's the main purpose. We like the sports section. But I'd like to give a shout out too to the Alligator, because I think lately their investigative reporting has been super. And granted, it's focused on the university. And I haven't seen that much from y'all focused in that direction, and there's been a tremendous amount going on. So can you speak to that at all?
Sure. So two things I would just say. You mentioned the sports. I feel like we've done well on the prep sports side, but we did just announce last month that we are making a play for Gator Sports. So, if you're familiar with Pat Dooley and you remember him, he's now with Main Street. So he's writing a weekly column for us, and so if you want to read Pat Dooley, he is in the paper now, as well as Mike Dame, who covered the Gators for the Orlando Sentinel back in the 90s. He's a UF grad as well. Anyway, to your question, I think, I wouldn't dispute your characterization, and that was part of the reason we wanted to get a full-time education reporter, because up until this past year, all we had was a part-time person who was also doing a bunch of other things. She was like maybe half-time education, and as you know, there's been a ton on the K through 12 beat to cover. So she was mostly focused there, and we really were mostly just sort of reacting to whenever UF puts out a press release or makes an announcement or something. We weren't able to really get to that deeper reporting that we need to. And so, that was one of the reasons we wanted to get an education reporter. And so while we haven't done a ton of investigations or anything yet about UF, we are doing increasingly more and more enterprise reporting that is unique to us about UF. And so I would say it's a work in progress. We haven't been able to get there yet, but that is one of the things we're trying to accomplish with that education reporter.
Oh, thanks. Enjoyed that very much. I have a question. Do you have somebody working on the UF presidential search?
We do, yes. That's our education reporter. He is working on that. And in fact, I haven't talked to him in the last, I don't have an update in the last few days, but when I last talked to him, he was working on a sit down with President Landry to talk about kind of this. I haven't seen him really do any interviews about the school year he's overseen. You know, like we're finishing a year of his tenure. So I think, you know, sitting down with him and you know, talking to him, I think is kind of the one step in that. But he has been posting, you know, we've been publishing updates on the search. Yeah.
To expand on the question about the music, I had the good fortune to be at the Gainesville Orchestra the other night and got this enormous reminder of how the arts have been just almost abandoned, and how essential it is that we have like creative thinking and imagination and all these things. Is there an opportunity here to do like maybe an article or feature story on all of that? Thanks.
About just the arts community in general?
Yeah,
or yeah, I mean, we definitely, I mean, we did do a story last year right when the defunding stuff was happening at the state level, and the way that impacted some of the stuff locally at the Hippodrome and et cetera. So I mean, we've covered some of that. We do. I mean, we don't have a dedicated arts reporter, unfortunately. We're not that big, but we do cover what's going on in the arts community because it is robust and vibrant here. And as you said, there have been a lot of you know, funding challenges for sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
So as you know, I'm a historic preservationist, and I try to save buildings. And I think you did great coverage of the Thelma Bolton fiasco. First, they voted to save it. Then the civil engineer did nothing for 2 years, and she said, "Oh, I think we need to destroy it." And within 2 weeks, it was demolished.
Yeah.
A significant landmark, state heritage landmark. But without your coverage of the Main Street buildings that were going to be torn down, I don't think they would have been saved. Because you had a full page article on the historic buildings there, significance of them, the old wine and cheese gallery. I know it had been abused, but it could still be saved, and it is being saved.
Yeah.
And I think your paper brought a lot of attention to that block of buildings, and without that, your coverage, I think we would have been nowhere. Lillian did a great article.
Good.
So I want
Thank
to
you.
compliment her.
Thank you.
And
She's great.
thank you.
Yeah, she's. Next month is the Florida Media Conference, and we have a 10. We've placed in 10 different categories, and 5 of the 10 are Lillian stories. So she's phenomenal.
Thank you for your talk today. I have a story idea for you.
Okay.
This area is a hotbed of information about the ICE detention centers. And there's a group in town called the Baker Interfaith Friends that visit the one up in McClenny. And there's also a group from UF in the law department that go up there. So there's kind of an interesting direct story on that.
Yeah.
But I think also because of the push from DeSantis to try and push them into rural areas and take over buildings that are currently built and maybe not being used. So I think it's really important. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've done some coverage of that, and I believe that group specific. There may be multiple groups, but I believe that group specifically that was working on Baker. That we did a story about their advocacy and what they're doing. I don't think we've done anything though on the law students. So that would be really interesting. We could. Yeah, I'll pass that on to our education reporter. Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm glad to have you in town, adding to the media swirl that we have, such as it is with the vacuum of major media going down. One easy question and a harder question. The easy question is, when you mentioned circulation, you mentioned 20,000 weekly. Do you do a lot of distribution like driveway tossing, or is that actual subscribers or people picking it up?
So it's the former, not the latter. So we're a free newspaper. So I mean, I started to say you can't. Technically, you can pay us to have us mail you a paper. We do that for as a service for people kind of in the outlying areas. We only do it for like 20 people, like it creates an administrative burden, and we prefer people to get it locally, So we do about 18,000 of our papers are delivered to homes and like in driveways. And then the other 20, it's actually a little over 20,000, so it's about 2,400 or so total that we put into racks and boxes and stacks around town. So there's about 70 of those locations, and there's a map on our website. So the idea is that we don't want anybody to have to go too far. If you live in Alachua County, hopefully you don't have to go too far to get a free paper. Either it's delivered to your house, or you can pick it up at Ward's grocery store, wherever you frequent.
Because in doing the iguana, I know we print 5,000 per issue, but most of that's going out to free locations around town and everything. So rather than just having a paper tossed in a driveway and counting that as circulation, it's different when people actually pick it up, which people do pick up ours. The harder question is, when you got started, obviously it took a lot of startup to get that going, and you mentioned on the three legs of things, philanthropy was part of it. Do you have a larger foundation or organization that helped that to happen? And is there limitations on what they want you to cover in any way or other, that you have to kind of cater issues that you cover?
Yeah. I'll start with the last one and then work back, because there's like three questions there. No, there's no limitations or anything. We have complete editorial independence. We, as Ronnie referenced, we were launched out of the Mark. She mentioned Mark Media, but the Mark Radio Group. So there's Mark Media, but then there's Mark Radio Group. So they have like I Am Country, Rocket, Magic 101.3. There's a group of like 6 stations, and so we had the benefit of, even though we are our own entity, with our own bottom line and everything, being launched out of a group of radio stations certainly helps. We got office space, etc. That gave us a running start, and so that really helped a lot. Did I answer everything? Was there one more?
It was more if there was any limitations on what things you could cover or not.
Oh, no. I mean, really, the biggest limitation on things we can cover is just our size, and that's why we're trying to grow our newsroom, because while we're bigger than we've ever been, we're still like, we perpetually have more stories than we can get to. So, yes, ma'am.
It might be nice for people to hear a little bit about what's happening in Apopka.
Oh, Apopka? Sure.
Apopka.
Yeah,
I always
that's
call
okay.
it Apopka.
No
It's,
worries. Yeah, so
I'm
Apopka
done
is
with my
sort of
question.
in Gainesville, we are, kind of swimming upstream in one sense, in that we had a brand new outlet that no one had ever heard of, that we had to build from scratch. That's really hard. And so that's what we did here. Then we went into print. Everyone else is going out of print. It's like we're swimming upstream here. But in Apopka, it's more of the traditional story that you often hear, and that was a case where it was a dying newspaper, and so the owner and publisher of 45 Years passed away in 2024, and so it was going to close, and so they literally just said, they gave it to us. It was like, if you could make this thing survive, good luck, And so we have, dived in and made some changes. They were like, their idea of going online was posting the PDF of the print edition online, So we've dragged them into the 21st century. There's too many people here to show you on my phone, but the first day I walked in, not the first day, but like in January of 25, I took a picture of the widow of the former owner publisher who had passed away. She was, I don't know if any of you have backgrounds in newspapers or anything, but she was literally like, there was a long wall with this like 45-degree angle boards, and she was cutting and pasting the paper together on boards. And this is last year. And so that just gives you it was like walking into a museum, because most papers haven't done that since like the 80s. And so we had to just completely, yeah, Ronnie did that. Yeah, right. It's been a long time. So they didn't have a dark room, but they had a lot of other things there. So yeah, basically the idea there has been just to keep this community from becoming a news desert. And so we've been able to turn things around, and we grew revenue last year for the first time in like 13 years at that publication, where it had been a steady decline, and we turned it back around. We're still not in the black, but we are on our way, and the community's been very supportive. And then we also have, now we're digital first. We post the stories online when they're ready. Same thing as with Mainstreet. The print edition comes out, but all those stories are pretty much already online by that point. And our web traffic is up 5x year over year in our first year there. So we're really pleased with that and the growth there of what we've been able to do. So, like I said, it's very different than here. We took over kind of a legacy publication in that community, whereas this one is building something from the ground up. And just, I do want to say one more thing and that is just that, like the Sun has come up several times today, and it's like, I feel like it's important to say, I wish the Sun nothing but the best, but it's not local people making decisions, and that's really the problem. It's really Gannett. And so, we can do the greatest job in the world of covering news today, and that doesn't change the fact that the Gainesville Sun is this town's history by and large. And that's really sad, to see what Gannett has done to that paper. So, and I've maybe some in this room, but I've certainly talked to numerous people around town who have offered to buy it, and Gannett won't sell it. So their plans are their plans. They're building a digital business on the backs of hundreds of local newspapers around the country. But I wish the Sun all the best, and I think the more robust the local news ecosystem can be, the better it is for the community.
Okay, I want to ask you to just comment on one.
Okay.
Can you comment just on one? You're holding that. Okay. I learned yesterday I was really upset. CBS Radio News is going off air now.
Wow.
After 100 years. It was a wonderful story that I heard about today, and I worked with CBS Radio News in Central America, so I took it very personally in a way. But I'm bringing that up because we lose a lot of national coverage as well with all the partisan back and forth, and Trump said this and Trump didn't say this, and now but how do we parlay our national news into better local news coverage, if that makes sense to you? So not that Main Street should be covering national news, but how does, in some ways, what's lesser coverage of good solid national news impact us locally?
Yeah, I think it does impact us. At the same time, I do feel like the national scene is just so cluttered with just so many outlets, and everybody has their preferred outlet to go to. It's not that the local news, it's not that people in Gainesville don't need to know what's happening in Ukraine or DC or wherever. We just know that that's not why they're picking up their local newspaper. You're going to get it from your cable news channel, from NPR, whatever. There's a variety of different outlets to get it from. So I feel like the national scene is going to be fine in terms of there will be somebody to cover that. What I would like to see from our national scene is more focus on the issues and the substance and policy, as opposed to so-and-so tweeted this and so-and-so tweeted that back, and all this stuff that's just designed to drive clicks is not actually helping our civil discourse move forward in any substantial way. And that's one of the things you'll see in Main Street is we try to focus on, the county commission did this, the city commission did this, we're not focusing on not that we never cover anything that happens on social media, but we're trying to focus on the real actions that affect your daily lives, not the yeah and the horse race of all the political nonsense.
Well, thank you. It's been very interesting. But I'm sort of curious how you got involved in this and how this all got started.
Yeah, that's a great question. My background is in local news in Texas originally. I started at the Longview News Journal. The first stories I ever wrote were not high school sports, Little League sports. Yeah. And I started delivering papers too when I was a teenager too. So I started at the bottom of this industry and have been in all sorts of places since then. But I got into news at first. I was an 18-year-old kid. It was like, I like seeing my name in print, and I like sports. And when I went to college in my mid-20s, and so that's where I kind of made the jump to some higher education and politics type stuff. So I went on the news side for a while. I did podcasting. I bounced around and done a lot of different things. But Yeah, just in 2020, happened to connect through a mutual friend with this company, and I moved my family halfway across the country to join this mission because I believe in the importance of local news. And there's research that shows when people consume national news, we tend to all think on a partisan, we think like partisans. Whereas when people consume local news, they tend to think like locals, and as I'm sure you all know, being the group that it is, I'm sure you know that local is where local impacts your life way more than national. And so that's really where I'm just passionate about, like, giving the people the information that they really need to make local decisions, take control of their lives. And you mentioned this being a blue dot amid a red sea. It's like, but this blue dot has a right to self-determination. And so I believe each community should be able to make good decisions about what's going on. So that's the answer to your question. I bought into, I want to stake my career on local news and not national news.
Just want to follow up. You mentioned about coverage on local stuff. Your coverage on elections is really important because you had a good profile of the upcoming races and who's running and things like that. People have to be engaged to know what's happening, and I think that gets lost because that doesn't really get mentioned on the radio or television. The Gainesville Sun used to do stuff, but people don't see the Sun now. So you're fulfilling a good role with that. I mean, we try with our monthly or semi-monthly presence. But you had a really good profile of upcoming races and everything. And I know you come out of broadcasting because you have very good microphone sense. It's like
I used to be in podcasting, and I learned that plosives go down. So I always move it to the side, and if you grip a mic like this, you'll sometimes get some feedback. And so I
You might even turn it off.
Yeah, exactly. You might turn it off too. But thank you for saying that. I do think that's one of those examples of that's our bread and butter. One of the things that we are, because typically the way election previews a lot of times happen are their features, and it's hard to make those as fair as they need to be. They can meander. They can reporters' bias or interest might seep into that. But when you're asking each of the candidates the same thing, and people can read, okay, this is how each candidate responded to the same questions in their own words. We feel like that's a really good way to inform the electorate, and hopefully, and we've heard from people in the community who've been like, this helped me make a decision about which candidate I want to vote for. So thank you for that information.
Thanks again. One of the things that affects local, not news, but everybody in a locality is what's going on in Tallahassee. Whereas Tallahassee isn't strictly local, but coverage of what their legislature is up to and how it affects us is. So how do you deal with that?
Well, so far, long term, I would love to have somebody based in Tallahassee, basically a Tallahassee bureau, who could report original reporting on the ground, develop sources, all the rest. I think where we are currently in our development, what that currently looks like is for each of our beats, we have people who will write a kind of a recap of the session. So we had one story that was like 6 education bills that just passed through the House. Nick did a story along those lines. So he just kind of ran through, here's what the 6 top bills that the legislature passed on related to education. I think Seth did one on some other major bills. But like you said, I think the reason we prioritize covering those is because it does affect us here. Like you said, it's not local news, but if they're passing something statewide, property tax reform, if they come back to that in a special session, we'll certainly cover it, because that's going to affect every one of our readers. So right now we just kind of cover it as we can, but we do recognize that it is important to know, on those major bills that they're passing.
You mentioned Seth, and I think he deserves a lot of attention. I mean, he's amazing.
He really is.
Yeah,
he's Seth
busy.
Johnson. Yeah. So he's actually, in a couple weeks, he will be celebrating 5 years with us, which I can't tell you how important and amazing that is, because a lot of local news outlets being smaller and not paying as much as the New York Times, and like a lot of them end up being stepping stones to bigger publications, and it's really hard to keep people for very long. And I think Seth doesn't. I mean, he's not from this community. We hired him and brought him in, and I'm just so thrilled that we've been able to keep him for 5 years. And I think we expect to keep him as long as we can for sure, because I think it actually helps that he's not from here, because sometimes when people will get all wound up about something, he can just cover it dispassionately and fairly, because he's not, he doesn't have a dog in the fight, but he's gotten to know a ton of people, and has, once you develop those sources, people start to, give you leads on, hey, you should check into this, you should check into that. And he's active in the community, and, he's part of the, I think he's part of the Audubon Society here in town. He loves birds. So, we're always joking with him about, if we don't know what's going on the centerpiece of the front of the paper, it might be one of Seth's bird photos that pops up, He has been known to write a story or two around his bird photos. But yeah, I think he's a bona fide expert on local government, and we've had compliments from everybody from Mayor Ward to Mark Sexton over at the county, and all these folks who just really appreciate the quality of his reporting, and that it's accurate. And last year at our 5-year anniversary, we had a little party to celebrate 5 years, and Mayor Ward was there, and I was talking to him, and he said, I can't tell you how much time we spend working on corrections with other outlets on things that have been reported. And he's like, we never really have to call y'all about correcting stuff. It's always right the first time. And that's by design. Like we make mistakes like everybody, but we've always put an emphasis on being correct and accurate over being first. So our story isn't always up maybe as quick as I might like it sometimes, but we try to break news. We like to break news, but more important, we feel like, is to be there with the accurate, substantial, in-depth coverage.
I'd like to, am I holding this right?
Perfect.
Plosives, any plosives? Okay. Years ago, during the Reagan years, the fairness doctrine went out the window. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to hear your comments on what effect that has had on media in general, not just print media, but also radio, podcasts, talk shows, the whole works.
That's a great question. I mean, I think the fairness doctrine, correct me if I'm wrong, but it particularly applied to broadcast. I don't think it didn't apply to print. But I don't know that it's the specific law as much as just the spirit of it. It's like, I think who was it John who mentioned, I love what you said, because you recognize your own tendency to get into an echo chamber, which we all do. And so like, I think it's important that we have a variety of views, but I think more important than any law is each of us just making an effort to understand, various points of view, to seek it out. And so that doesn't really answer your question, but I don't have a specific thought further on the policy itself.
Well, here's a follow-up question. You covered sports originally when you started off in this profession. Did you ever cover professional wrestling?
I did not. I covered professional sports, but not
professional.
Yeah.
Is there a particular reason for that? Was it fair and balanced, or was it theater?
Yeah, I was working for a local newspaper, so unless there was a WWE wrestler who was from Longview, Texas, we wouldn't have really had an angle to cover.
Well, it's just sometimes listening to some of these radio broadcasts, yada 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 kind of things, I'm reminded of. Perhaps for professional wrestling matches where you've got the good guy and the bad guy, and they're chewing on each other and saying ridiculous things. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's the White House press room, no, but there's some echoes there.
Right.
In the kind of failure to listen to one another. That's not the issue. The issue is the contest, is the duel.
Exactly. It's the conflict that they're trying to highlight, right? And I think that's a really important insight about, I'm biased toward print, but I think TV is entertainment, and I think people need to remember that when they turn it on. They're trying to keep you tuning in we got breaking news in 20 minutes. It's like, wait, if you got breaking news, why don't you just tell me now? It's because they want you to keep watching. That's the whole idea. And these things that they do, like, on the one hand, I can appreciate when they bring somebody in, it's like point, counterpoint. Like, I can appreciate that. But what I don't like is that it's usually political operatives. It's not actual journalists. And I think that's a key distinction, is a lot of what we see is just more and more politics and the horse race and who's up and who's down and all that stuff, as opposed to real reporting. And I have a friend, no, as you said, Ronnie, CNN's not what it once was, but I have a friend who was working at CNN, probably 22 to 25, somewhere in there, 2 or 3 years. And her job was to keep up with the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader, everything that they said. And she's like, it just got so, like, I couldn't do it anymore, because she cares about policy. And she's like, you don't have any time to go and actually look at policy because you're too busy chasing every tweet and every response to every tweet and all these things that aren't really substantial. So I feel like that's a critique of my own industry, is that we tend to follow, do these things that we know will get clicks, and everybody wants more traffic and all this, at the expense of what's really going to move the needle.
Thank you, JC.
Thank you.